Hello.
So how you been?
Not too bad, I guess. We just got back from a funeral in Winnipeg, so wait 12 hours of driving.
Wow. Yeah, I've been in like about a month of not walking.
Holy cow! What?
Yeah.
No
But
kidding.
it's what can I do? It's like my fucking feet from the accident, man.
Right.
But sometimes, like even like someone goes, "Oh, is it better?" Like, well, yeah. Sometimes I can walk, which is kind of similar to before. What happens to me is like I don't know what kind of disability is, like periodical. How about that? Periodical disability.
Right.
It's a weird. Like sometimes I feel fine, like doing stuff, and then it could be I can't walk for a year.
Wow.
And I have no fucking clue when it's going to happen, how long it's going to be. So it's been a month, and I don't know. I can barely walk with the cane. It's like my feet feel like swollen balloons. I just it's fucked up, man. And my fucking hands,
no kidding.
the arthritis, my ankle, my knee fucking swells up. But anyways, as you know, I don't let it stop my activism.
Right.
But I did, as I told you. Hey.
Hi, guys. Not sure if you can see me yet.
I can see you.
There you go.
Anyways, like I was saying to you too before, I don't talk about it a lot because I'm a very passionate person. The fact that I can't walk shouldn't be an issue anyways.
Right.
Right?
That's good.
Right on.
Okay, so how are you guys doing?
I'm doing. So basically I'm open to hear your experience, especially any feelings or whatever. But always remember that we're recording this, so if you say things, it's not going anywhere. And I don't take videos down unless something like illegal or something is going to cause a problem.
Well, okay, I'll try to behave myself.
Well, I mean, no, go ahead. I'm just making a comment that, people before have said things more than they probably wanted to say in public.
Yeah.
Because they get to talking to me and it sounds so friendly, they forget this isn't just a conversation. This is a recording. I was just saying that.
Got it. Yeah.
We're not just having coffee here.
Right. Well, the reason I bring that up, and I don't always say this, by the way, to everybody. The reason I bring this up because you talked about PTSD. You talked about sexual abuse. You get what I'm saying? So because I'm great with those topics. I just don't want you to do something to make yourself feel uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really care much about the public, what they think. I'm more that you somehow, put yourself in a vulnerable position. In other words.
Oh, yeah. Totally understand it. I appreciate that a lot, guys.
Right.
And I will apologize ahead of time if there's weird gnawing sounds in the background. That's Bran with a long-lasting treat, my little ferocious Chihuahua mix. I have to bribe him for video calls because he likes to attack me for some reason. And it sounds like there's a Tasmanian devil in here when he does. So
yeah, I closed the door because my cat will just get up and like almost sit in my face.
And we're camped out in my RV, which is also our current home.
Right.
So hanging out.
I lived in an RV before on actually 2 different news resorts.
Yeah, we're hanging out in the back bedroom because I'm getting over a migraine today, so lighting is not great.
Right.
And I may lose words, so
that's fine. Yeah,
we're
a really easygoing thing. Because of being an anarchist in general, we don't have like a specific thing, as you see. But other than we want truth, I mean that really is a big and thing for us is that we like truth.
Well, I'll do my best. I guess as an introduction, I'll say a little bit about myself. I have a BA in anthropology from Mississippi State University. And from there, I went to the University of Chicago for Egyptian archaeology. And I got my MA and then continued with coursework. Took my comprehensive exams, which are like day-long or half-day-long exams on specific topics, and they're horrific. And you don't sleep, and it's basically torture. So, always fun. Passed those, and then I was getting ready to propose my dissertation. And
what was it on?
well, I had a couple topics because I had an advisor that kind of went bye-bye midway through. And that kind of necessitated switching topics. I was planning on focusing on kind of the relationships between a culture in what's now modern Sudan called Kerma, which is kind of coexistent with Middle Kingdom and very early New Kingdom Egypt.
Right.
That had grown into a pretty strong regional power. And then our work that I'll talk about a little bit later, my own field work in Sudan, in the Fourth Cataract region. So the cataracts of the Nile are these kind of rapids. The Fourth Cataract is particularly brutal as far as rapids go. And the Nile Channel there is really, really deep besides. So there was actually an assumption there was not much of anything there until they decided to build the Hamdab or the Merowe Dam at the Fourth Cataract. And they did archaeological survey in the area with a bunch of international teams and discovered, hey, there actually was stuff there. And one of the things we found was some evidence of at least some kind of interaction with Kerma based on some of the ceramics and other things we were seeing. The Kerma culture has this very, very distinctive type of ceramic called the Kerma beaker. They're kind of tulip shaped almost.
Yeah.
The top is black, the bottom part is red. And then right around where that transition occurs, there's what is usually described as like a graphite band. Basically, it's a slightly iridescent kind of silvery band that wraps around the whole piece.
Cool.
They're really cool. They come in a few other shapes, including some that look like teapots. And they seem to be really, really highly prized. We find them in grave goods in Egypt as well. And we also occasionally find them where they've been repaired after having been broken. So they aren't just chucking these things away. So I was hoping to kind of look at the various graves in the Fourth Cataract and try and analyze the degree of contact that may have been going on with Kerma at that particular period, and how much influence they may have had in that what would be considered kind of a hinterland or kind of, the outback area.
That's cool. I think that's really important because I think that some archaeology focuses on like inwardly what's going on, particularly at a site or even in a region. And
I've
I
always
think
been interested in kind of the cross-cultural contact and kind of those liminal areas. And particularly with Egypt and Nubia, the relationship there, which kind of, I can't exactly quantify it specifically, but there seems to have been kind of a different flavor to the relationship, I would say, than with a lot of other Egyptian imperial holdings, like in ancient Canaan and into Syria and that area.
Was it somehow resource-based?
There's a long history of contact and a long history of Egyptians exploiting particularly gold mines in the area and some other trade that we see, all the way back into the pre-dynastic. The Egyptians characterized various Nubian groups as enemies. So the Egyptians have these kind of traditional enemies that are called the 9 bows. So they're often shown actually as, like bows and arrows. One of the prime examples, if you look for something like King Tut's sandals from his tomb,
Uh-huh.
there are gold embossed bows on the instep of those sandals, so that
Okay.
he, with every step, is traditionally stomping on these enemies of Egypt. So there's this magical political aspect to it. And so there's sort of this stereotype of Nubians as, barbaric and as, particularly skilled warriors, especially bowmen. Occasionally they're hired as mercenaries, which is not necessarily something we see with, say, people coming out of Canaan or out of Libya until fairly late in Egyptian history. Whereas we have these Nubian groups that are hired as mercenaries, or that are, you have another kind of nomadic group called the Medjay that go from being sort of these nomadic raiders that bother the Egyptians around the borders and around the oases to becoming a police force, basically, that patrol the deserts and patrol particularly the Valley of the Kings and areas like that to try and protect those areas from looting.
And didn't in Egypt, didn't like the whole area of Egypt is considered to be the domain of the king? Like you couldn't like, it's not like what I mean is like, it's not like capitalism now where a company can go, well, I own this thing, and even though a king may own the country.
It's actually interesting. You can there's sort of a shift over time.
Oh, really?
Where it goes almost from the country as the king's property to it being more of a notion of nationhood, still under the control of the king, but not necessarily quite so much his personal property.
Right. That's what I was thinking, because I know stuff about Egypt, but not the way, like, obviously the alt history people. I don't. It's not. I mean, nothing against Egypt. It's just I look at everything, so I don't.
Yeah, it's a lot of material, and I mean, when you look at Egyptian archaeology and Egyptian history, I mean, we're talking several thousand years worth of data. So there are areas that I know kind of the surface level on, but I can't possibly account for like each and everything. Which is one of the things about training in archaeology and Egyptology that is important to remember, that we do tend to have a general overview of regions or of whatever specialty we do, along with kind of a specialization, whether it be a period or a particular site or a particular aspect of material culture. But part of what our training does and what academic training tends to do is it also gives you the tools to find more information when you need it, which is not as simple as a Google search, no matter how much some people wish that were the case.
Google isn't a university?
It is not, amazingly enough. And for Egyptology in particular, it's a fairly old discipline, and it has its roots in Europe, and it also has its roots in wealth and colonialism.
And would you say racism too? And
oh yeah, and that carries through to the modern day. It's something that we've increasingly tried to address and acknowledge, but it certainly isn't gone.
Well, and it certainly won't be gone. Like the people now are anti-woke, which is just like anti trying to solve the problem that's already there.
Yeah, and between this kind of rising tide of anti-intellectualism and anti-humanities and some of those issues, it is there are increasing problems there.
Yeah.
With Egyptology in particular, most Egyptology programs require you to learn to be able to read both French and German.
Oh, really?
In addition to your native language.
That's interesting.
In order to cope with all of the literature, because a lot, especially linguistically, a lot of the the publications on language are in German. Some are also in French. And of course, Egyptology as kind of a formal discipline, you see emerge when a Frenchman, Champollion, manages to translate the Rosetta Stone. And then Napoleon invaded Egypt in the late 1700s. The British then defeated him. And the French and British sort of split control of the country while kind of claiming that local leaders were actually in charge. They also founded the Department of Antiquities. And for a very, very long time, the publications that were submitted to the department were often in either French or English. In the past few decades, they've required them to also be in Arabic, finally.
Okay.
Which
I know that there's
kind of nice.
There's a few times that I wanted to read an article and it's a foreign language. I had to translate half of it, like to even understand what was going on.
Yeah. So when I got to Chicago, part of the requirement to get my MA was to pass reading exams in both French and German, which were, especially the German when I was there long ago, was notoriously brutal. We had like one person who grew up in Europe and spoke German flunk it.
Oh, geez.
So brutal at one point.
Oh.
So that was awesome.
I was going to say, is that because the German is like an arcane form of the language?
No, it was mostly that the person who was writing the exams was just a jackass, pretty much.
Oh.
One of those, I will make this hard to build character, and everyone's it's not actually helping anything.
Yeah, then it's not a test.
Right.
It's a trial.
Yeah.
And then, the French exam I took was actually mostly Québécois, which was fine, except for a few random idioms that I hadn't learned because I was reading academic texts, not, newspapers.
Yeah, because France French is not the same as Québécois.
Yeah. It took me a while until I was like, okay, now I understand why this is not making sense here.
Yeah.
So, particularly with Egyptology, then you have to contend with multiple languages. You also have to contend with kind of the classic reference works, which are usually, huge volumes that are difficult to access, haven't necessarily been digitized.
Right.
And so I think that makes it harder for at least some of the general public to access some of the deep research that they may want to.
Well, no, there's also paywalls.
Yeah.
Everybody puts. That's also why I don't do that specifically as a form of financial activism.
Exactly. Journal publications are, and access to journals is ridiculous in a lot of cases.
And what's really funny? Some of this, I've been doing this for a long time, right? So some of my stuff is like 10 years old. I got the article when you could actually copy it. Now it's blocked. So I'm like one of the only sources, some of them for free, I'm talking about. Because I put the quotes on there and you can't even get them now. Just like, even, in fact, what's even crazy, that the Critical Thinking International Association, right? They have this big, like, several page thing of critical thinking, and now you can't even get it. And I have it on my one of my blogs because it was years ago before they started making paywall everything.
Yeah, paywalls are a major issue, and particularly when you lose access to academic libraries. So I mostly anymore just kind of, if I can't find creative ways of getting things myself, poke people who still have access.
Yeah, right. That's a good one.
Do the whole like, hey, could you do me a favor? Send me a PDF.
True. Just because if you buy the book, like I bought several archaeology books to read, and they're like $100, $150, and then also like I bought the one on archaeology of Turkey. It's like 1,500 pages or whatever.
Yeah.
It didn't even. It was hard to hold. I'm like, this is an offensive book. It's like holding a brick.
Yeah, I have a couple, that I bought at various points because I knew I needed my own copy, but that hurt. As a grad student, it was just sort of like, okay, it's ramen for 2 weeks again. I need to buy this book. So, it's both a bar to access, but it's also something, to bear in mind for sort of amateur archaeologists or for pseudo-archaeologists. And pardon me, we have
she don't like them, huh?
Brian.
Or yeah.
Good boy. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. We bark at pseudo-archaeologists. Good dog.
That's right.
Good boy.
Rock! At least he's not making video calls himself again, which he did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, and I was going to say that besides Atlantis, isn't like Egypt like the most like honed in thing for, like a homing beacon for pseudoarchaeology?
Yeah, and I mean, it goes back to even before Egyptology emerges as this formal European discipline, where you have people like, I think it's Athanasius Curtier, who's, looking at Egyptian hieroglyphics and saying they must have this deeper magical meaning. The actual ability to translate them had been lost to Europe. And so they're looking at these inscriptions from items that, the Romans had hauled back to town, or that travelers are bringing to Europe and going, hey, isn't this cool? And trying to make these kind of metaphysical or alchemical translations of what is actually written. And assuming that there's some deeper, greater knowledge beyond just this king built this on this date. It was really cool. The end. Which is frequently basically, the less than serious but basic translation of a lot of inscriptions on statues.
So have you felt like you've been attacked a lot by the pseudoarchaeologists because of being so focused on Egypt?
I think on a personal level, I've been attacked by some of the pseudoarchaeologists because I don't put up with their bullshit. And am willing to challenge it and say,
well, everything should be open for that.
Since I no longer work, I have the virtue of being basically unfireable because, they can, I guess, try and talk to Bran. But beyond that, I'm just, sort of like, okay, guys. And having taught for a very long time, or at least a lot of short-term but intensive courses on history and things like that, I've gotten fairly good at breaking down arguments and analyzing them, and then being able to do that with some of the pseudoarchaeology stuff. And I can still remember enough from formal training to be able to go, okay, I can give you an example of this, I can give you an example of that, or I know where to go look.
Well, I appreciate you doing that.
And, since I'm not also trying to maintain an academic career, I have a little bit more time than a lot of, currently active archaeologists and Egyptologists. And honestly, there's still an attitude in a lot of the field that we should just not acknowledge these people. That's been kind of the approach for as long as I've been in academia, which is...
And for me personally, I was very disheartened because I actually wasn't, my goal was never to learn archaeology or any kind of stuff. My goal was just, I wanted to know after I realized the Bible was a lie, I didn't trust atheists' answers. I didn't actually trust anybody because I realized my whole life was a lie. I wasn't feeling really trusting.
Yeah.
So I just started. But one of the things in school that had inspired me to become atheist was actually archaeology, because it was showing contradiction to the Bible with just archaeological facts. And so that I felt was, for me, the most comfortable that I would be able to know what's the truth. You know,
right.
Because I don't feel very trusting. I want to go look myself. I bought books. I did stuff. I looked. I wanted to understand. And then the more I understood, I started like telling people, "Oh, look at this," and then they would fight back. And so I already felt that I didn't know pseudoarchaeology, even a term, but I would do things, and then they would say all this nonsense, and I'm like, "What?" And so the more that kept happening, the more I had to make the blogs better, because I'm trying to fight back. All of a sudden, it's like a 300-page book, blog. But it's all really started because I just wanted to fight back, and I care about the truth.
Yeah, from the time I was in grad school, 25 years ago, I thought that we needed to get better at public interaction in general. That especially as social media and the internet started to pick up more and more, and grant opportunities got a little bit more difficult, and funding did strange things, that we were going to have to maybe look into doing more things like what's now called crowdfunding, more, online interaction, to get support for projects, to get support for departments. And, to try and maybe confront some of the more egregious pseudo-archaeological claims, particularly those that tend to, reinforce or perpetuate some racist or otherwise completely anti-intellectual ideas that are potentially damaging.
Totally agree.
And then, of course, as cable channels, grew, and so-called documentaries started showing up on the so-called History Channel, and the so-called Discovery Channel, and the so-called Learning Channel,
and the Travel Channel. Did they do ghosts and all kinds of other nonsense? Or what was the one that Long Island Medium or whatever, that kind of nonsense?
Yeah, I mean, there's a host of them, and like so many people, I got into Egyptology not so much because I was into pseudoarchaeology and ancient aliens, but because my father was when I was a kid. And I needed a topic for a paper when I was like 8. And Dad was like, "Hey, do Egypt," and Dad had like seen Chariots of the Gods in the theaters, and the pyramid power thing for a while. Whoops. And the whole shebang. Love my dad, but he never really kind of got out of that mindset. So trips home were entertaining on occasion, where I'm just like, "Dad, please." I'm literally an expert in this. Could we not? So, I got at least some familiarity with the topic from, that angle. And that's also basically when I decided that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an Egyptologist. So, as those things emerged, I thought it was pretty clear that we needed to start trying to address it more. But the argument has typically been that, if you acknowledge it, you're legitimizing it.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know much about Graham Hancock, because all these years, all I've been doing is trying to know what truth is. So I don't pay attention to noise, but I share my stuff, and someone says, "Oh, your stuff is out of the box thinking. Maybe you should check out Graham Hancock." And I think your stuff is kind of like Graham Hancock. And I didn't know who it was. I'm like, "Oh yeah." So I look at the thing, pseudoscience, pseudoarchaeology. Oh hell no. go, fuck that
Yeah.
shit. And so that's when but because I had read that, that's all I read. I thought he had like one book or something. I didn't know. And it
No.
wasn't until John told me all the stuff about him, and I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know all that.
Yeah. He's been doing this a long time. And he's been basically trying to kind of set himself up as the successor of our favorite tax fraud, Eric von Däniken. So, yeah. And of course, for Graham, the controversy sells. It's a benefit to him to have, in my opinion, this, confrontational, drama-laden relationship with archaeology and Egyptology.
For sure.
And to say, oh, they're trying to silence me, because that automatically gets people going, oh, they're trying to silence you. Why are they doing that? Let me buy your book and find out.
Yeah. Let's watch
or
your
it
Netflix
appeals-
series. Or
It appeals to this, ongoing kind of undercurrent of conspiracism in American culture in particular, and in Europe as well. This idea that elites are hiding things from you, which frequently they are.
yeah, but not
but
the
I
way
hate
that
to
they
put it
think.
to you,
Right out in
it's
public
not so
and-
much, shamanic moving stones with singing as, Epstein's pedophile island.
Right. Yeah.
So if we could maybe focus on the actual problems there, as opposed to archaeologists are hiding ancient space lasers, that might be helpful, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh no, I totally agree. I mean, that's why I said the archaeologists now, they're doing it. I think it's great. I've been trying to do it, but I didn't know as much about the problem. I thought I was more handling it in the atheist community and the leftist community, because they would say shit to me because I'm friends with them, and I'd be like, "What?
Yeah.
No, fuck no, ancient aliens? Are you crazy? Fuck no." They're like, "Oh well, look at Mexico and this." I'm like, that did not happen the way you fucking think.
Yeah. I mean, starting in college, my friend's favorite entertainment at times would, to get me wound up ranting about von Däniken or whoever, and picking apart the various arguments and all of that, for fun. And then when I was teaching and able to develop some of my own courses, I had actually started to plan a course kind of addressing alien archaeology type stuff, which unfortunately I wound up not being able to teach. But even then, Ancient Aliens had just started to become a show, and whether we like it or not, it's part of pop culture now. It's part
absolutely.
of what kids know and what adults know coming into college or coming into other courses. And I think as a teacher, I've always tried to find creative ways to reach students in ways that they can understand, that take into account their own backgrounds, and to use metaphors and examples that make sense to them on a fairly basic level.
Right.
And I think that's something we have to contend with educating in archaeology. We can't really pretend that this isn't a thing anymore when it's become so much a part of mainstream culture.
Right, and that's why I told John there was the two things that made me realize I need to take this serious, because I had not been, like I said, I heard it, blew him off, and then went back to what I do, and then but it was that two times. One was an atheist, and one was a leftist, and the atheists and leftists almost said the same thing. Basically, we don't need to trust science. Graham Hancock shows us that science is a bunch of liars or whatever, and I went, oh, fuck, this is a science problem.
Yeah. And, that's another issue too, in terms of what actually is science and how do we construct science as, a basis of organizing knowledge and generating more knowledge versus how people define science kind of in everyday life.
Yeah.
And I think that's also kind of an issue that we desperately need to address with the public. Whether they want to actually use science as a way to approach the world is their own business, but it would be nice if they at least understood what it actually is versus what it isn't. And the same goes for archaeology. I mean, if you look at some of the more common comments on social media and coming from some of the pseudo-archaeologists, there's some entertaining but not very accurate assumptions about what it is we actually do for a living.
Could you go ahead and say it? Because some of my audience are more political, so they may, or if they just listen to whatever I say, they're not really researching this. And I know, like I said, even me, where I was kind of involved in the searching for truth, I wasn't paying attention to the nonsense, clowns. So as I meant is that you should share what they say so others can understand.
I think probably some of the prime examples, in the past few months since I've gotten kind of more into the online fray, with people like D. Dunker. Oh, Dan. Such a great guy. And Jimmy Corsetti. And I will refrain from further comments. This whole like, oh, all you do is go dig up rocks, or, your clothes aren't dirty. You couldn't possibly have actually been doing any excavation. And, this idea that there's this kind of universal shared narrative among all of archaeology. Or that we're all trained exactly the same way, or that we're all not trained in exactly the same way. Particularly when it comes to things like the pyramids and megalithic structures and things like Göbekli Tepe. There's an assumption that we have no training at all in architecture or engineering or stone cutting or any of these kinds of things. I think some people think we just go out with shovels. That maybe we go out with sifter screens too and sift the dirt. And they don't necessarily know much else. And that's partly because there isn't a lot of accurate media depicting what we do, either fictional or documentary necessarily.
Right. Wasn't Corsetti the one that said archaeology isn't a science or something like that? Or was that?
That's an ongoing thing. And there are archaeologists who will say that archaeology isn't a science.
I feel it's a science and a humanity. It also, to me, is part of anthropology. It's actually a subheading of anthropology. It's anthropology, subheading archaeology. Just like you could also then subhead that and then say, I just do artifacts, or like you said, rock cutting, or just there are, or someone could do experimental archaeology from that, and it's just another, like, to me, whatever subheading of, like you open the windows, all these different things. So I think that the people that say it's only one thing, wow, you're fucking stupid.
Yeah, or at least, not really taking a look at reality, because, the way the discipline is made up, in terms of coursework and, subdisciplines, it depends on the country in a lot of cases. It also depends on the topic. So my undergrad degree is in anthropology, and I focused on archaeology. And in the US, archaeology is usually considered one of the subfields of anthropology.
See, I didn't know that. I just know that from my mind likes to see things like in how they connect. So
right. So with anthropology, you've got, biological anthropology, which, is usually looking at particularly skeletal remains, but also, paleontology and early human ancestors, you've got linguistics, you've got archaeology, and then you've got sociocultural anthropology, which is, people dealing with living cultures, basically,
Right.
and doing ethnography.
Yeah, I think ethnography is cool too. I don't say that enough, but I've talked to one ethnographer so far, but I really value that. Just so I can say it publicly, I value that a lot because it helps me. I like to read a lot of that stuff because then I get more of a mindset, not Damien, living today or whatever Damien's experience. I can get into more their experience and then think like them.
Yeah. And that, has tended to be my goal when I was teaching, particularly Egyptology courses as anthropology electives, in trying to kind of convey these different cultural ideas to get people thinking about cross-cultural interaction. Which is why when I taught Egyptian religion and magic, I had my students create magic spells.
Cool.
Within kind of the guidelines of Egyptian magic, to say, think about this like an Egyptian probably would.
Right.
Here's a problem to solve.
That's good.
How would you go about it? And particularly,
isn't that in a sense almost like an experimental archaeology to do that? Because you're actually recreating it. I mean, I know with experimental archaeology usually is artifact kind of related, but I could see how even in linguistics or whatever, or the mythology, that's a really interesting way to do that. It's cool.
Yeah. And, I was thrilled because I showed up for that first test and they had drawn a spell on the board so they would pass.
Nice.
And I was like, I did it. Hooray. This is like the best thing ever.
Yeah, that's great.
So, that was a lot of fun. And, the thing is, I was teaching at the Tulane School for Continuing Studies, which is sort of a non-traditional career-oriented degree program. It's, like a small camp. They have a couple of small campuses outside of New Orleans. And so this one was actually in the mall in Gulfport, Mississippi. So, I teach my course and go outside and there was Santa, which was a little disconcerting at times. So, I'm looking at this course as not people who are, looking to go forward in Egyptology, not people who need to try and struggle through random German articles, but, making this course somehow useful to them. And so with things like the Egyptian religion and magic things, with, come up with a way to solve this problem from this cultural perspective, it's a way for people, who were in, like the hospitality management degree program, to think about customers coming in who are from other cultures, recognize that they have a different perspective. And that's something you need to take into account. So, even Egyptology can become a source of practical knowledge for people. It's a topic that has value beyond just, hey, this is really cool. It's a way of, understanding other people, whether it be in the past or the present. It's also a way to kind of address kind of hot topics that are difficult to talk about in modern terms, whether it be race or gender or, warfare, political concepts, because it gives you a bit of distance. You aren't actively a part of Egyptian worldviews,
Right.
So it's a little bit easier to talk about things like the construction of race and ethnicity when it's not directly you at this moment.
Right.
It allows a little bit more objectivity, or at least an opportunity to kind of stand back and not be right in the middle of the fray. But with pseudoarchaeologists, getting back to kind of how they characterize archaeology, There's this assumption that we just dig nice square holes, that's all that's involved in the training. And it's something that the general public kind of has assumptions about as well. I mean, my family was the same way. They had, no idea and usually no interest in what I was actually studying. That I was reading massive amounts of political and social theory,
Right.
to try and talk about the emergence of various governmental systems and cultural systems, that I was reading social theory and, French philosophy and other continental philosophy and um, so, there's
I
this
know my,
assumption.
my stuff is more what do they call that? Academic or Atlantic philosophy than continental. Continental is
Yeah.
to me more like wishy-washy fucking fantasy land bullshit, or sometimes.
Yeah, and archaeology has its postmodern or post-processual theorists of various flavors. There's neo-evolutionary theorists. There's what's called processual archaeology, that's very science-oriented. And debate and argument between kind of those camps. That, yes, it can get heated, and at times, there's sort of a could we shut up and actually look at some artifacts. Instead of talking about Levi Strauss and Ricoeur and Lou Binford and whoever. But at the same time, I think it makes the discipline better by challenging assumptions and making,
Oh, absolutely.
the people who have their various theoretical perspectives have to really scramble to either explain themselves better or to analyze their own ideas more critically in response, and recognize that there are multiple ways of looking at the past and looking at the evidence and interpreting the evidence. The important part is the rigor with which you do it. The representation of actual facts.
Right. That's what I always say to people that always complain, right? A lot of people, pseudoarchaeologists, get a bum rap. And I'm like, I say extreme shit all the time. The difference is I fucking use facts.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. How archaeologists don't hate me, but do hate your stupid ideas. Yeah. Because they're not based in facts.
Yeah. And the thing is, I don't mind talking about some of the wilder ideas, or that people don't necessarily know everything because of, the barriers that we talked about before.
Yeah.
But, when it starts from the assumption that we're full of shit no matter what we say, it gets a bit tiresome.
Yeah, it's totally wild. And it's crazy too that Graham Hancock, like this, or any of those people, they don't really give facts, and yet when you give facts that debunk them, somehow your facts are not trustable. I mean, it's bizarre. Like, wait a minute. That's not how that's supposed to work.
Yeah, the standards of evidence change dramatically, depending on who's presenting the evidence.
And it should not be that way. That's crazy.
No. And I honestly, some of the success I've had though in challenging some of these ideas with some people is to say, what are you actually learning about these ancient people?
Right.
From Graham or from Jimmy or from Dan or whoever.
Not a thing.
Like, what new knowledge do you have other than Göbekli Tepe exists? And there's some rocks there, and some people think ancient hunter-gatherers couldn't move big rocks. Like,
and
what else
they
do you know?
Fall back, Damien. How you explain that? And I go,
yeah,
I don't know. Maybe they use fat. Because you said, how can you make rock move on rock? I said, fat. I said, you do agree that they were killing animals and they could have had fat and smeared lots of fat and got enough, I don't know, 300 people to pull And yeah, it's not impossible. I mean, they act like things are impossible. Like it does not
Mhm.
hard, maybe insanely hard, but not impossible.
Well, and there's a major issue too in that people are, look at something, and if they can't immediately figure out themselves how it was built, then obviously
Yeah, sorry. Then
it must
nobody
be
knows.
impossible. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, let me take you and point at the Empire State Building. Now, tell me, don't go look for blueprints in the library. Don't go watch any documentaries. Tell me right now, how was it built?
Yeah.
Okay, you can't tell me that. Obviously, it was aliens.
Yeah, that's right.
Or
If I can't figure it
I'm
out
looking
right
at
now.
it going, oh
Yeah.
no, King Kong stacked some stuff. Clearly, this is the answer.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and this is what we get, along with, the assumption that we just dig nice holes in the ground. And sometimes we don't do it fast enough, Jimmy.
Oh yeah, well, Jimmy says you're supposed to go to a site and just take
Yeah, we're supposed to
everything
just
down.
scrape it,
Yeah,
which,
with a
no.
bulldozer or something, I guess.
And, there's, again, the assumption that we all approach these things the same way, where that's not the case. It depends on the site, it depends on the excavator.
Well, you're also addressing he doesn't have ethics. Does it even ethically sound correct that you go to some other country and they just dig everything up
right
for him because we have to? I mean,
yeah.
You're like, that doesn't even what that first off is how are you justifying that? And then it's not ethical. And I think that's why I thought it was funny when John said that Göbekli Tepe should be closed. They should put cement over the top, and Jimmy was getting all pissed off, and I was like, actually, Jimmy, I don't disagree with that. We know some stuff. There's other sites that we could dig. I go, you act as if he's like, oh, it has to be done within next 10 years.
They flailed about it. I mean, they're still flailing about that, and that was months ago. And Jimmy declaring that we're enemies of archaeology and we're incompetent, when I'm not entirely clear how you can weigh in on any of our competence if you yourself have never participated as even a volunteer in any excavation that I'm aware of, or taken, so much as a single course, or even, glance through a textbook. Which, isn't to say that you can't have an opinion on archaeology if you haven't done those things, but I would think if your goal is to challenge so-called mainstream archaeology, you might want to know what we're actually about so you could argue a little more effectively.
Yep.
But of course, that would require actual research.
And I think it's also an intellectual dishonesty.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you have intellectual honesty, then that's a requirement. I mean, as an axiologist, I judge things, right? That's what axiology does. It's the process of evaluating. But you can't evaluate. Axiology knows that that's not the first step. That's the last.
Right.
The first step is you have to do ontology, which is the understanding what it is you're talking about. Exactly. And then you're not even at axiology yet. Then the next step is epistemology. How do you know that? Is it justified? Is there other things in relation that could maybe debunk that or make it more stronger? And then you judge it.
Yeah. And that's not what gets done.
No, not even close.
Graham and Dan and Jimmy and various other people kind of create these logical fallacy straw men versions of archaeology to argue against. And then, you look through, say, Graham Hancock's list of references in his bibliographies, and he's looking at information about Egypt that was published, 50, 60 years ago, or a century ago.
What a fool.
and trying to make, I mean,
Back when they thought maybe it was the Bible.
I'm flipping through, and some of those things are still valid sources.
Right.
There's still classic works that are still good. But when you're looking at what we often call survey texts or popular books that are written for a more general audience, or that are supposed to kind of summarize the field, you might want to look for something a little more update. I mean, and so for a long time, I don't know if Graham continues to make this argument or not, but the claim has often been that the Giza pyramids emerged practically out of nowhere, or pyramid building and Egyptian civilization in general emerged out of practically nothing all of a sudden.
That's ridiculous.
Which has not been a mainstream idea for, again, like 50, 60, 70 or more years for most Egyptologists and archaeologists. And particularly in the past few decades, we've got a huge additional amount of information about the emergence of kind of complex Egyptian society and a unified state, and more information on elite burial practices, and you can see the trajectory of the tradition of tomb building that leads up eventually to the construction of pyramids in a nice progression.
Yeah,
there's no sudden appearance. Flinders Petrie, who's sort of the grandfather of the discipline, who was a major forerunner and a major innovator of scientific archaeology in a number of ways, was also frickin' racist. He was renowned at the time actually for being relatively less racist than his colleagues when it came at least to modern Egyptians, but still pretty damn racist. Oh, hey, cool.
Well, speaking of racism, there also is a lot of sexism, and I'm sure you've probably experienced some of that personally, correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Although Petrie was actually one of the people who was perfectly willing to train and employ women. And his wife, Hilda, actually played a pretty significant role in a lot of his work. And he credited her for it, which is not always common in archaeology.
Well, I watched that show on, I don't know how true it is, but on Einstein and how he treated his wife. I was like, wow, you're a piece of fucking shit if that's real. Fuck.
Yeah, some of the kind of dark underbelly of various parts of academia is sort of the unsung labor of wives and daughters and siblings. Whether it be something as simple as typing up all your papers,
Right.
Or doing all the housekeeping and organizing at an excavation house, or taking the photos and doing the drawings and not getting credited. And that still goes on from time to time. But Petrie, despite some of his very innovative thinking, also at the time he was working in the late 19th and very, very early 20th century, based on what had been excavated up to that point, went, okay, it looks like this whole new group of people showed up that he called the dynastic race. And of course, this is the same time period when there was this assumption that white Europeans, particularly Northern Europeans, were superior. And then, as you get further south and darker in complexion, capacity for doing cool things apparently is less, which of course we know is nonsense.
Yes.
But his, Petrie's idea is all of a sudden we have monumental architecture and the emergence of the state. So there must have been this influx of superior people who unified the country and introduced state level society and formal religion and started building pyramids. And that's very clearly not the case based on mountains of evidence, whether it be skeletal or genetic or archaeological or anything else. But it's still an idea that lingers. And it's an idea that lingers behind, the Atlantean idea or the, lost civilization idea, that these people couldn't possibly have come up with this on their own. Therefore, someone had to tell them how. Which,
And Graham doesn't think that that's racist. He goes, "Oh, no, that's not. I'm just saying, like, it is."
And Graham also uses incredibly outdated and frankly offensive racial terminologies.
He does.
He makes assumptions about race from assuming that race is a real biological entity rather than something that cultures construct themselves.
I know. I talked to a race realist. I should say talk. I argued and schooled a race realist, which is one of those fuckers that think that, well, I'm not really a racist. I just think races are true. And I go, racism is bullshit, and so is race realism.
I mean, it's incredibly subjective. You can take a
I
group
asked him, what is the taxonomy of race?
Yeah.
The scientific taxonomy of race. He was like, well, there really isn't. I go, well, there isn't.
There isn't.
You know why there isn't? Because it's not a thing.
Yeah. And I mean, the exercise that a lot of, anthro professors will use is, photographs of a bunch of different people with various physical features and saying, okay, what race is this person? What race is, and people are all over the place.
Yeah.
It's not this subjective, okay, I can definitely say for each and every person. And it's not something that was necessarily perceived in the same way by ancient people. So, Graham and other people, it's not only Graham who does this, looks at ancient artworks and goes, I don't know, that dude looks black to me. And okay, dude, but you're coming out of a 20th, 21st century, Scottish background of what a black person looks like to you that may not apply remotely to, Olmec heads or whatever, and you're not considering that a lot of these artworks aren't meant to be portraits. They're not meant to be hyper-realistic depictions of particular people. They have symbolic meaning. They have stylization. It's like
going around. You talk about because people try to tell me, oh, look at the paintings on the wall. I'm like, for Egypt, I'm talking about. And I know that don't they paint the colors specifically for male and female or for different people? Sometimes not accurate, but just there, like you said, a stylized, like this is how we portray an Egyptian male or something.
Yeah. And I've done Twitter threads about this, with examples where, the Egyptians basically, men are usually shown in this red-brown color. Women are usually shown in kind of a yellowish color. The idea, being in part that particularly high status women aren't going to be outside as much. They're not going to be as athletic and toned and, sunburned as men. How much that actually reflected what people really looked like. Meh. And then, for different racial or cultural groups, there are these very stereotyped renderings. So, Nubians are usually a really, really dark brown or actual black. People from the Levant are kind of a yellowy ivory. Libyans are sometimes shown the same way. A lot of times there's these, they're shown in these super elaborate costumes and hairstyles and headdresses that they might have worn, but that may also have just become a shorthand for that dude is an Asiatic. Right. That guy is a Nubian.
Right.
In some, cases, they may reflect ethnic costumes that hadn't actually been worn by anybody for centuries, but that was the standard way to show them so that everybody knew that guy's Nubian. And, the really striking thing that I discuss in that thread is Heka Nefer, I hope I'm remembering his name correctly, who is shown in a tomb in the Valley of the Nobles in Egypt, showing up at the head of a delegation of various Nubian leaders, bringing tribute to the pharaoh and the vizier of the region. And he was important enough to actually have his name written down, which the other guys didn't really get shown. And Heka Nefer is shown as like this very stereotypical Nubian with this really dark brown skin, these kind of animal skins and elaborate hair that's contrasted to the usual kind of plain white linen and more simple outfits of even high status Egyptians. But then you go to Nubia, and we actually have Heka Nefer's tomb, or we did. I think it's in the area that was flooded when the Aswan High Dam was constructed. But his tomb, which is kind of damaged, but still, accessible, is decorated as though he were an Egyptian. And he's shown and painted as an Egyptian in that tomb. So if you're going to try and make racial categorizations, which is Heka Nefer? Which depiction are you going to say, okay, yeah, that dude is definitely, meets the modern standard of black, or, this guy was definitely, white and must have come from far, far away. Like, you have to look at these things in context. You can't just, pull them out and say, okay, this painting shows, somebody with a white face. Obviously, there were, lost civilization submarines traveling the ocean or whatever the hell, Graham has spouted recently.
Speaking of white skin comes from the female line of R. And Graham Hancock, I said just something funny to me, knowing this stuff. Graham Hancock said that the male line R went to the Americas and brought white skin. I'm like, okay, especially Paleolithic, there was no, I'm like, Graham, that's the wrong DNA. You're talking about what a man did, but the DNA that has white skin is women. And the first place that it goes is the Cossack Mountains from Siberia. The Cossack Mountains, 12,000. No, is 10,000? Oh, I can't remember off the top of my head. But then it goes to Finland at the same time. They show up, boom, both from the same place. And I go, so I know white people did not go, not Paleolithic or whatever, did not go to the Americas, Graham. No, 100%.
Yeah. And, Hancock does these things and people go, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck in this, okay, and he's able to just say, okay, this thing, these people look black in this depiction, or these people look white in this depiction. And, here's that sculpture, or here's a photo of that painting. Or here's, this fragment of a myth. But they're all pulled totally out of their cultural context. And in order to try and challenge or debunk a lot of these things, it requires a complex explanation.
Yes.
And people are not always willing to accept that, because the simpler, no way, there were, these other people that showed up and showed them how to do it, is easier for short attention spans and easier to wrap your head around than, okay, let me tell you about art style.
It confirms my already racial assumptions.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And most people tend to think of race as this, perpetual idea that applies in the far distant past and across culture, without recognizing that that's not remotely the case. And it's a difficult topic to talk about for a lot of people.
We talk
and-
about it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know you probably haven't watched a lot of my videos, but I'll say that shit all the time because to me, I feel like I'm on constant war with racism. So I say it all the time because I feel like it's a non-ending fucking war. So I got to keep fighting.
Yeah, and unfortunately, though, trying to talk about it now in public education and a lot of those contexts immediately gets labeled as woke nonsense, and people stop listening.
Yeah.
So it's one of the other issues that we kind of have to struggle against.
Well, I think pretty soon it's going to get really bad because Trump is literally anti-woke.
And, Graham has embraced that. Jimmy has embraced it. Dan has embraced it because it's bringing in the clicks. It's bringing in the money. And it happens to also bolster their own weird-ass ideas. And, when it comes to the issues of white supremacy and racism being perpetuated by some of their ideas, they refuse to actually engage with any of the arguments that various archaeologists have made. And, instead have gone for the hyper emotional, you called me a racist, how dare you? And unfortunately, in a lot of modern society, it seems like somebody saying you're racist or you just said something racist is more of a faux pas than, actually being a fucking racist.
Yeah.
So they're easily able to distract, and it becomes this, you're attacking my personal, this is an ad hominem fallacy, and you're getting personal, and how dare you call me a racist that I'm married to someone who isn't white, or, whatever.
Which is really stupid if they understood logic.
It allows them, it allows them to just completely sidetrack and not address the actual argument of, you guys are repeating stuff that is blatantly white supremacist and racist. You're repeating stuff that is being happily praised and used by modern white supremacists for recruiting material. And yes, we all know that you're not necessarily responsible for who buys your books or what they do with them. But when you've got this kind of stuff going on and it's a repeating theme, you should maybe look at what it is you're saying that seems to be so appealing to them and address it. Or at least every once in a while say, hey guys, knock it off. I don't want you using my work this way. I don't support your ideas. This is not, okay.
He should say that all the fucking time.
Yeah. He's
not a credible person at all, but I agree with you. Even though everything else could be fucked up, you could at least do that. How hard is it to say fuck off to racists? Unless...
Yeah. Graham finally kind of got shamed into it because a reporter finally kind of called him on it.
Which means to me that how can he say he's not a racist? I would be like, look, only a racist would be comfortable with racists.
And of course, his counter response was, in part, I'm not a racist, but also I'm not responsible for what other people do with my work. Okay, but you are responsible for looking at, the intellectual heritage of the stuff you're talking about.
Well, and I think he's also he is responsible to condemn that kind of use. I told Corey, sometimes I've talked about Asia. If all of a sudden Koreans said they're using my stuff to somehow do pseudoscience or whatever, promote, Asian superialism or superior, ideas or something, I would immediately make a blog, make a video, talk about it, condemn it every time I did a thing if I had to.
And we see the same thing with Egyptology, whether it be, Black supremacy, white supremacy, various groups have jumped all over Egypt as proof, and generated all kinds of conspiracy theories in all kinds of directions. And this idea that whoever was actually living there is incapable of doing these things, perpetuates these ideas of hierarchy of races or ethnicities.
Yeah.
And, the ideas that Graham either cites or just recycles, going back to, the 1800s, the 1900s.
Yeah, when the
A lot of
racism
them
was
were, either reflecting the white supremacy or racism of the time, or were, actively developed to further it in some cases, to further the idea that, yes, white Europeans have a right to manifest destiny because, Native Americans didn't build anything interesting.
Right.
They weren't farming, so we should take this land and do something good with it, which is, patently ridiculous. But it's a heritage that needs to be acknowledged. And it's a heritage that archaeology shares to a great extent, and that we need to continue to address and make up for. But we're not the only ones who have a responsibility to do so. And
yeah, it's a society issue.
Yeah, somebody who's trained as an investigative journalist, who has worked in, pretty significant war zones like Hancock has, should be aware of this, one would think, but, instead he prefers to sidestep the issue altogether in favor of archaeologists are mean to me and they won't think outside the box.
Which I think is funny. I told Corey before that I think that is the most bullshit argument. If every archaeologist wants to attack me for my ideas, it is not your fault to believe me out of nowhere. It is for me to defend my ideas.
Yeah.
How could I hate you for challenging something that I have not demonstrated? I mean, I find it to just be the most irritating, like philosophy-wise. You made a claim, real simple. You got the burden of proof. Calling other people for being mean by challenging. I have a saying that the truth is best championed in the sunlight of challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So when people challenge me, I'm like, great, good. In fact, everyone want to challenge me? Great. I love answering and showing you what I know.
And Graham can't quite seem to decide whether he wants archaeologists to take him and his ideas seriously, or if he wants us to leave him alone. Because he kind of goes both ways, where he's like, archaeologists won't look at blah, blah, blah. And frequently we actually do and have, but that's another topic. And then other times says, well, I'm just throwing out hypotheses. I have a right to put out these ideas or these narratives or to suggest these things without being attacked.
I'm just asking questions.
Yeah.
And I made amendments because they just making money.
Make up your mind. Do you want us to look at your ideas and tell you what we think about them?
I do.
Do you want us to go look for your supposed lost civilization? Or do you want us to ignore you so you can, continue weaving your little fantasies? Pick. Because honestly, it's getting a little old. Or, as Graham likes to say, everything is getting older.
Yeah.
Maybe,
yes, in fact, everything is getting older, I guess.
Or he's taking the species with amnesia a little too seriously and forgetting which it is he wants. Dialogue with archaeologists or for us to ignore him. So.
Well, he's not going to add his theory to archaeology ever. So.
No, I mean, he's contributed practically nothing.
His theory is nonsense. That's why I don't believe archaeologists. I've looked for myself. I know he is full of shit nonsense. I feel more strongly about it than even John Hoops, because I understand how the DNA relates, not just to archaeology. I'm like, it's impossible. His ideas not only don't show up archaeologically, how the movement went, that contradicts everything he says. So
That, and the way he constructs questions and the way he constructs hypotheses makes them almost impossible to really evaluate. They're not falsifiable.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And he won't necessarily give specifics about what it is he wants us to look for. He's been doing this 30, 40 years and, devoted his life to this and devoted his life to, iconoclastic hypothesis, blah, blah, whatever, and doing stand up at Glastonbury and Sedona or whatever. But he hasn't, in all of that time, bothered to learn any of the ancient languages that would be helpful so he could look at the mythology he likes to pull out of context. He hasn't taken the time to even, as far as I can tell, so much as crack an art history textbook, let alone some of the deeper archaeological texts. I said earlier he uses incredibly out-of-date sources. Particularly for Egypt, that conveniently support his hypotheses, but don't reflect the most up-to-date research. He's not sponsored any excavation. He's not acquired any archaeological training that I'm aware of. And a lot of time the counter argument is, well, it's all bullshit anyway, so why should he do it? Well, if you want to be taken seriously by the mainstream, change the system from within, or at least figure out what it is they do, how they construct arguments, how they write journal articles, and do that.
Yeah.
Make
Get
applications
published.
for
Yeah.
research.
Yeah,
You
get
can
published,
do that.
discover something. Yeah, for real.
Yeah. Or, dude, go dig something up. I mean, just give us something. Or, give us something more than these vague, well, they probably had ships, but I'm not sure what kind. They maybe didn't have metalworking, but I don't know what they would have had instead. Well, okay. And then we have his fan club going, why won't you guys go look for this lost Civ stuff? Why won't you go, discover new ancient mysteries? I'm like, what do you want us to do? Go excavate every continental shelf? You want armies of archaeological scuba divers out
he's going to pay
there?
for it, right?
What? Yeah. So it gets to be a little bit ridiculous. And in the meantime, people are missing really, really amazing details about these ancient cultures that we do know about. They're missing the most up-to-date finds and discoveries and the changes in paradigms and the changes in chronologies that we've been seeing all over the world at various time periods. Because they're so fixated on trying to prove these bizarre ideas.
Exactly. It is ridiculous. Like the fact to me that they, like I said, when I watched his second show, his first show was terrible, but I believe it or not, I guess I liked it better. His second one was
I think everyone has said that the first one was at least more entertaining or dynamic.
I'm like, wow, this second show is boring.
Yeah, I think I made it to the third episode and just finally went, oh, I don't really want it.
Did you see that? I think that the worst part for me is when he tries to explain where the culture came from, and he gives 5 different not connected options, and they're so they're like it's like he goes, well, Indonesia. I'm like, what the? Not an island specific like Borneo or some kind of specific. No, the whole region, and then of course the Americas. Like, oh my God, we're at 10,000 miles. The Americas? You mean?
Yeah,
it's somewhere along. I'm like, and then he's like, oh, and India. And I'm like, how could anyone listen to him say that and go, oh oh yeah, I'm trusting that dude.
Just gonna pick these big regions and say
Yes.
it's somewhere in here.
Oh,
We're going to pretend that everyone here all had the same monoculture. They were all speaking the same language. They were all no.
That's what I'm saying. For me, it's like bizarre. It's almost laughable. People believe this? Oh, come on. How?
Yeah. You know, and there's this, I think there's this sort of romanticism or this ego boost, you know, thinking, well, I know this secret that everyone else doesn't know.
Yeah.
Or, you know, my common sense is way better than the stupid crap these academics in their ivory towers come up with. You know, these people who never work with their hands and have never built anything in their lives. And meanwhile, I'm looking around going, have you ever been in, you know, way out in the wilderness in Sudan where there's no running water and the only electricity is solar panels or a diesel generator that I'm pretty sure dates back to like the British invasion? You know, and had to build most of your equipment by hand, right. And, you know, come up with creative ways to take fragmentary evidence and do something with it besides describe it, you know.
Well, I actually wish that society would fund archaeology more. I really feel it's because I feel like it's like anthropology, also all the humanities I really think are great, but to me, I think we need to learn who we are, because I think when, especially even now, I think it's more important even than before. Before, we always went outside, we always hang out. When I was a kid, you know, we didn't have phones. We had a pay phone that we had to walk like 3 miles to get. If I was outside, not home, I would have to like, I need to leave. They're like, oh, you have time. No, I got to walk to the pay phone. I mean, I'm just saying that so I feel like everybody now is online and is disconnected from like the society and humanity. It's easier to hate. It's easier to feel, you know, that you're the only thing in your little box. So I'm everything. I mean, it's so much. So I think that there's a lot of benefit. Unlike Corsetti, who thinks the only thing is the rocks, I really think that who built the rocks is more important to me than the rocks. Everyone goes, oh, look at the pyramids. Like, yeah, it actually makes me think, wow, that's a lot of culture.
And so many of us have gotten so far from either working with our hands ourselves or watching other people do it that it feeds into a lot of these pseudo-archaeological assumptions about, you know, hunter-gatherers couldn't possibly have done X, Y, or Z.
Right.
When people have these bizarre ideas that, I mean, it seems like they assume that all hunter-gatherers were wandering around on the verge of starvation, you know, with, you know, extraordinarily primitive tools and no organization, and frequently also somehow much, much stupider than us, which isn't remotely the case.
No.
You know, it's not the case historically, where we have historical records of people who, you know, and with hunting and gathering, it's literally just a description of how they feed and clothe themselves.
Right.
It's not necessarily a description of how large a group they are. There's a huge range of how much they move around, what kind of political or social organization they have. And that basically just gets ignored in this assumption that, you know, it's like 5 guys wandering around with, you know, their wives and a couple of kids and some sharpened sticks. No.
But even have you ever seen the Hazza? They have bow and arrows that are just literally, like you said, sharpened sticks. And they kill things and eat. So
exactly.
Like, sharpened sticks are pretty effective, even now.
And, you know, even when we're looking at this transition from hunting and gathering, which incidentally, depending on the environment, you can build up, you know, significant surpluses of food.
Yeah.
And you can remain in one place for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
You know, it's not this razor's edge living situation that people seem to assume it is, based on, whether it's Hollywood romanticism or only seeing documentaries about like the San people in the Kalahari Desert, which is
Right.
Usually the favorite popular example, or some Native American groups that we only have knowledge about at the very end of their time as actual free people, not restricted to a reservation that didn't even resemble their original homelands. When we look at the actual evidence, we've got people who are, staying in one place for seasons or for half the year, and leaving caches of food behind.
Yeah.
And, we see people who are at times living in, smaller family groups, but then coming together seasonally to do things like harvest particular sources of food, like, nuts or berries, or salmon runs, or migrating herds. And at the same time, they're organizing large groups together to do fairly elaborate, socially interactive things that require planning and logic and an awareness of, the span of time and what time of year it is and what season it is, and how, to know it's time to go to where the reindeer pass through every year. It's time to go and look at the landscape and say, hey, we can kind of build sort of a funnel with the rocks that are already here, so we can drive them right into where it's easy to kill them.
Right.
And hey, it's a really handy spot because there's a river here, so we have water. There's some woods over there, so we can build fires and smoke some of the meat and have ourselves a party and, organize. It's not that far from that to, hey, let's all get together and build this cool rock thing that commemorates what we do here every year, or commemorates the time of year we come and do this, or that says, hey, this is our territory, stay out. And a whole lot of people who don't necessarily know that they shouldn't be able to do something based on modern assumptions.
Yeah, that's right.
And actually do some pretty remarkable things.
Corey thought it was pretty remarkable. As I did those 5 videos about kind of what you're talking about, showing how really amazing hunter-gatherers are. People have the wrong opinion totally. And I showed him how the guy takes a tree, rips the bark off, shreds the bark, and then builds a little weaving thing and makes a rug and
yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
humans
great.
have remarkable ingenuity, especially when they don't have, iPhones and porn to distract themselves with. I mean,
Yeah, that's right.
If you have nothing better to do, you get pretty creative with new things to do.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think it's wild when they go, oh, well, they couldn't do this, or they would have had to have really strong ropes. I'm like, they did.
Yeah. I mean,
you're right. That would be a good point. Yes, they probably did.
And when it comes to things like cutting stone or stone tools, we're talking about people who have been working with stone intimately for millennia, for more than millennia, since our, hominid ancestors.
3.3 is the oldest stone, Lodewin stones, the 3.3 million. And then 3.4, there's cut marks on bone in Ethiopia, but no stone tool. But they know obviously a stone tool made the cut.
But every group of people starts off with zero knowledge. They didn't learn anything from the other people before them.
Yeah. And it's not like people have spent their entire lives chipping stone to make tools, working with stone to grind, wild grains or nuts or whatever to make them more palatable, that they aren't familiar with, how certain rocks in a hearth react to heat.
Right.
Which ones tend to blow up and kill og, because they crack when you get them too hot, and then think, oh, hey, maybe we could use that to make the rock the shape we want it to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Or who aren't observing the natural world and seeing things as simple as, thermo expansion with seasonal changes in stone, where freeze thaw cycles create breakages in rocks, and then making the leap from that to how can I, kind of reproduce that effect. And I think it's something that too many people take for granted, that isn't something that ancient people would be capable of.
For sure.
Well, I appreciate, just like I said about John, I appreciate you and any archaeologists that are going out there and fighting back, because I think it does matter, because science and all of our humanities, I think, lies in the balance if it isn't done, because obviously this is the greatest way to hate science.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, a leftist said it to me, and so did someone who was an atheist. And I thought both those kind of people should fucking know better.
Yeah, and the thing is, I loved teaching. Giving up teaching was just absolutely heartrending for me. Leaving archaeology was traumatic in a number of ways. And so getting back into this has actually been a healing process for me on a personal level, but also, an opportunity to use those skills that I developed in new ways. And, to say, look, there's all this other cool stuff that you guys aren't paying attention to, and I will talk your ears off about it if you let me. So,
well, that's all the stuff that matters to me. Like I said, I've told Corey before, even though we did videos on all the mounds that or monolithic kind of structures, that actually doesn't appeal to me. I did that more as to debunk the bullshit.
Yeah.
I care about how humanity. That's why I started millions of years ago to all the way to 4,000. I wanted to understand humanity, and it's how did we get to here? And so that I don't really care about. I mean, I do like art, but I mean, that's not as important as the artist.
Yeah. And, my interests and focuses have changed over the years from, looking at the emergence of the state or the emergence of complex societies to, I didn't really start getting that much into examining religion and the relationships between religion and culture and magic on a deeper level until after grad school, which was kind of regrettable since one of my favorite professors was one of the leading experts on Egyptian magic. So sorry about that, Robert. So there are all these ways, though, to connect with the past and to look at the ways people made sense of their worlds and to recognize both how incredibly different we can be, but still share some underlying core of humanity that is virtually universal. And that has value. The more we learn about ourselves as human beings and how we relate to the world and how we cope with crisis or with bounty is important and valuable. And I think a lot of pseudoarchaeology erases all of that.
Oh, yeah.
It erases things like, the painted dockets on some of the blocks in the Great Pyramid that say that the block was moved by a gang of workmen who called themselves the drunkards of Khufu.
Yeah.
It erases people who were writing letters to the dead, and the guy who is writing a letter to his dead wife that basically says, the kids are fine, I'm fine, but the maidservant keeps freaking out. Will you please stop haunting the house? Or even things as heart-wrenching as child burials with, dolls that are very lovingly placed in with the children. And, being able to kind of see the grief and care that went into, preparing these people for eternity. And I mean, it's something that gets lost in the, there were
I don't even think they care.
giants, who were here to warn us all about whatever. Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I don't even think the pseudo-archaeologists care really about history. They say they care about Egypt, but they don't really. Even Göbekli Tepe, he doesn't really care about Göbekli Tepe. He doesn't really. He would know a lot more about a lot of things than just about what the art on the rocks look. I mean, there's a lot more going on. I feel like it's just a lie. They go, oh well, you don't care.
And to some extent, I kind of wonder, what is the end goal here? What does Graham think is going to happen if suddenly tomorrow the vast majority of archaeologists wake up and say, you know what, Graham, you're right?
That's not going to happen.
What, but then what happens?
I live in the real world.
In Graham's world, what does he think happens next?
Oh, Graham's world. Oh, okay. Graham is I think it's really just about the money. To me, Graham could not only can Graham not do good against archaeologists, Graham can't do good against me. Come on this show, Graham. I'm not an archaeologist. Come on, I think outside the box, but he won't get me to believe his stuff. Believe me. I mean, so yeah. He's a joke, and so he's not, and like all of his foolish followers that don't care about the actual stuff either. Otherwise, they would actually learn. And what's really crazy is I tell them, I have blogs that explain stuff. They go, how can you explain it? I explain stuff, but they won't even look. I'm like, do you not see how close-minded you are? You won't even look.
Or that if you can't describe every minute detail, that means the whole thing is nonsense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it to some extent too, though, like, what is the goal? Is this gonna, uncover the vast international conspiracy that's been holding us all back from, vast energetic consciousness? Like, what is the goal here?
Yeah, that's right.
Are we all gonna be able to move rocks by humming soon? Like, what happens if we accept your ideas?
But like, I told John, as soon as I know about shamanism stuff, I've read like 4 books on shamanism, and because I always tell people the difference between me and everybody else is I hate reading. I fucking don't want to read anything more, so I only read nonfiction. I don't have any time for anything that is not fucking truth. I just don't have any time. I don't read not popular anything. I only read nonfiction, science-related nonfiction. I don't. So because of that, I really laugh at some of the ways that Graham Hancock says, or I'm like, I know you have a lot of money, fucker. It's very expensive to buy these books for me. You got millions. Yeah. You could have read. You have all this time. If you really cared like me, you would read that. I read the Archaeology Handbook by, what's his name? Timothy. Oh. It's Archaeology Handbook of Ritual and Religion is one of the ones I was talking about.
I think that sounds familiar, but the author is not.
Anyways, I think now it's, but it's probably old now because I've been doing this so long that now I probably say things I read and you're like, that's 15 years old, Damien.
Well, I mean, bear in mind that, I've been basically out of the field for 10 or 15 years. So I'm also doing, catch up and trying to bully my brain into, doing a lot of, high level reading, or at least attempting to at times. So, yeah.
But anyways, I'm going to be I need to go to eat. So go ahead and anything you wanted to wrap up and say or promote or whatever you want to say.
Well, I mean, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to you guys. It was great. I'm always available on Twitter, and on Blue Sky as well under the same username, which is a dancing ferret. I'm happy to answer questions about archaeology and Egyptology if, you aren't a jerk. Even if you are on occasion, I'll answer questions because I'm just kind of like, all right, I'll troll the troll, whatever. I'll scrap. And, as time goes on, I'm hoping I can develop, some more accessible educational threads and other podcast visits, kind of answering some of these questions and talking about some of these things that people are genuinely interested in and that they're missing if all they're doing is watching Ancient Aliens and Graham Hancock and whatever the hell it is that Jimmy does. So, beyond that,
Jimmy, doesn't he literally say he's a conspiracy theorist? I think he just owns it.
I think he probably has owned it by this point. I know that people like Matt Walsh, of all people, have been like, dude, no. So, I mean, I think when Matt Walsh thinks you're full of shit, you should
you're in trouble. Yeah.
reevaluate your life choices there.
Yeah.
He's freaking terrible. Well, I also want to say I really feel irritated that people say things directly to the archaeology, organizations, the archaeologists themselves, specific archaeologists. I mean, it's horribly disgusting.
The stuff that has been done to particularly people like Flint Dibble has been just, I mean, it's over the top. It absolutely unacceptable.
I totally agree. It's freaking ridiculous.
I mean, you can argue, you can troll, people are dicks. Yes, we know. But, I mean, there's a point where you just don't go. You don't dox people. You don't try to get them fired just because you don't like what they do for a living. Fortunately, it hasn't been that successful, but, it's a lot of abuse.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot of bigoted abuse as well. And it's just, it does nothing to further any kind of actual information. Jimmy's not actually teaching anybody anything but, new slurs to use. Grow up, contribute something.
Really?
Take a look at what your actual goals are. Obviously for a lot of these guys, it's money. And I understand that. I'm at this point also, looking at, is there a way I can monetize some of this to supplement disability income? Because, I'm poor.
Well, you right. Well, you could. Corey knows how to do it. I don't really have a podcast. I just do videos. I actually don't try to make money. I just literally do whatever I feel like, and that's it. I mean, that's why I make 3-hour videos. They go, well, if you made 10 minutes or an hour, people listen. I go, yeah, whatever.
And, I mean, that's fine. If you're a content creator, that's fine.
No, I was just saying you could be one. I was just saying you could
have ethics in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah. Correct. Oh, definitely. That should be the first thing.
Yeah.
No, but I was just saying that Corey could, if you wanted to, that's all I was trying to make a point, is if you wanted to get into doing podcasting to where you got to do it, I think, live, and there's a lot of stuff you do that can make it more active.
Yeah. Definitely.
And then monetize. That was my point. I don't monetize anything. Everything I do is free. I've done that from the beginning. I said, but I have nothing against. That's why some people don't get it. I do it as my own ethical thing to go against capitalism and to just be, make sure anyone could learn from, that's my goal. But I'm just saying,
that's the thing. Most of the archaeologists who are doing this are not making money.
Yeah.
Right. No, but I was just saying, I don't have a problem with people making money. As long as you're doing ethical stuff, I have no problem making money. You're trying to live. I mean, so I was just making a comment that I think that you have something valuable. You talked about valuable. And I think that, you could, make it into a thing, especially if you did it live and you let people call it. What I was going to say is there's an atheist thing, right? They call it asking, where they call in, it's like a call-in show. You have people call in and they say, I believe in God and I hate atheists. And you got to go, well, I don't believe in God and here's why. And then here, anyways, but I was just saying you could do something like that and it would probably be pretty popular, especially because you do Egypt. I can't imagine how you wouldn't have a lot of people.
which could be very entertaining and,
Yeah.
very sweary at some point, probably.
Yeah, that's right.
Particularly since, I tend not to be, terribly serious most of the time. At least, I try not to be. So I think a little bit of snark is occasionally fun, especially since I'm not actually in academia anymore. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, definitely, because
yeah.
the more fun it is, the more people want to watch it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I was just saying, I think that it's something you could do, and it could be lucrative, especially if you did it in a certain way. Like I said, I really think the best for if you do it fast, like get famous fast or whatever, is do a live show that's call in and let people call and ask you all their nonsense questions about Egypt and archaeology. I think that could become something really. Yeah. Anyways, so it was nice to just an idea. Yeah. Anyways, so I enjoyed having you on, and I do really appreciate all the hard work that you did as an archaeologist and doing defining culture, and I really appreciate what you do to fight pseudo-archaeology, because it's more harmful really to me than just some people have some stupid ideas.
Yeah. And I mean, there is value in taking a stand against a lot of these things. Even if it's tiny and it's only one voice,
Yeah.
it's still worth it.
Absolutely.
And a lot of what I do is not necessarily for who I'm responding to, but for the people who are reading.
Exactly.
And, may not be interacting, but are seeing something to at least think about or a new perspective.
Yep. And I hope that people go and follow you and give you support, not just give you a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, hopefully people will come up with something a little bit better than Cat Lady, because I'm allergic to cats. And get some new material, guys.
Yeah. At this point, like, come on, that's got to be a pretty old insult, right?
Yeah, I mean, Corsetti's whole, oh, she's crazy, she has toxoplasmosis. Okay, really? Okay.
Yeah.
You couldn't come up with anything like, there's a lot of material there, dude.
Yeah.
I'm a middle-aged, divorced, disabled woman, and that was the best you could come up with? Really?
First off, to me, attacking disabled people is fucking bullshit also.
Yeah.
That's fucking bigotry. It's fucking gross. But anyway, so Corey, go ahead and tell us about what you do real quick, and then we can end it.
Sure. I got the Skeptical Leftist podcast. We talk about a variety of books from a anarchist and Marxist perspective. And I do a bunch of interviews with anarchists and leftists of various types.
Sweet. So. All right. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yes.
Appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Bye. You too.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am Damien Marie AtHope. In the simplest terms, I am an atheist-humanist philosopher and prehistorical writer-researcher at DamienMarieAtHope.com. I am specifically an axiological atheist. An axiological atheism can be thought to involve ethical and value theory reasoned and moral argument driven apatheism, agnosticism, atheism, anti-theism, anti-religionism, secularism, and humanism. Axiological atheists can be understood as a value theory or a value science atheist. As an axiological atheism's ethically reasoned and constructive pro-humanity. I am an axiological thinker, value theorist. The science of goodness, worthiness, usefulness, valuableness, virtue, reliableness, accuracy, validity, morality, integrity, beneficialness, etc., etc. We axiologists have a value consciousness. And in general, we see the architecture of humanistic humanitarianism value in people that we see as dignity beings. Places and things are not. Axiology is a value theory. In its broadest sense, it involves areas of philosophy that are deemed to encompass some evaluative or evaluation aspect. Therefore, it crosses almost all domains in some way or another. Now for a more detailed terms as to what I am. I am an axiological atheist, an anti-theist, an anti-religionist, secularist, humanist, rationalist, writer, artist, poet, philosopher, advocate, activist with schooling in psychology, sociology, as well as I am an autodidact, self-taught in science, archaeology, anthropology, and philosophy. I promote science and am against pseudoscience, pseudohistory, pseudomorality, things that are found in religion.